Good afternoon. Happy mid-November. Holidays are soon upon us. But for today, we have other things to talk about. And so first of all, I want to welcome you all here for this month's edition of Bites and Bits of History, which is sponsored in part by the John and Loretta Hines Foundation through their generous gift to the capital campaign that helped us to develop Tyler History Center here. My name is Bill Lawson. I'm Executive Director of the Mahoning Valley Historical Society, and it's always good to see so many of you, so many regulars, new faces. First time for anybody? Good. Very good. So before we get to the speaker, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping and self-promotion or institutional promotion here. It's now Memories of Christmas Past season at Arms Family Museum. We opened last weekend, and our hours are Tuesdays through Sunday, noon to 4. And between today and this coming Sunday, the 23rd, we are in our Operation Feed Our Valley campaign. We participate in that every year. And if you bring non-perishables, which would include boxed or canned food, and show those to us, you get half off on admission for that day. So we have 4 more days of that through this Sunday, the 23rd. And once we get past Thanksgiving and into December, we will have Twilight Thursday hours, meaning that on those days, the 3 Thursdays before Christmas in December, we will have open hours of noon to 7 p.m. And it's a whole different experience being there after the sun goes down in terms of the way the light plays and just a really cozy feeling in the museum. So please, if you want to do that, the first 3 Thursdays in December will have Twilight Thursday. Looking ahead to next month, our program will be on Thursday, December 18th. And our speaker will be Dr. George Johnson, who has become a regular for our December edition. And he is an expert on many things vintage Christmas. And this year he will talk about 19th century Victorian Christmas cards. So that's noon here on Thursday, December 18th. But today we're going to talk about the Civil War era again and go a little bit beyond Mahoning Valley into the Shenango Valley, which is right next to us almost entirely in western Pennsylvania. But our speaker is Taylor Alaska, and he will be doing today's program on the Shenango Valley Civil War story and its ties to the Mahoning Valley. So that's the rub here. We want to put those 2 regions together as they are geographically and oftentimes economically. But a little bit about Taylor. He is a native of Sharon, Pennsylvania, and is serving as the president of the board of directors of the Sharon Historical Society. From a remarkably young age, he's been very much invested in local history. He joined the Society's board in 2014 at the tender age of 15. He is a 2017 graduate of Kennedy Catholic High School, and he went on to earn a bachelor's degree in marketing and professional sales from Westminster College. He's widely published. His works include Grand Homes of the Gilded Age, a richly illustrated exploration of Sharon's historic and grand residences. He also authored The Magic City, The Mills, Men, and Homes of a Company Town Forged in Steel, which delved into the industrial rise of South Sharon, which we now call Farrell, Pennsylvania. His most recent book is Lost Department Stores of Sharon, Pennsylvania, commemorating the downtown shops that once defined the Shenango Valley and downtown Sharon as a commercial hub. And beyond writing, Taylor is also active in community in other ways. He leads guided historic tours particularly of the Buell Mansion and works in hospitality management and tourism. He also serves as city councilman for Sharon and strengthens his commitment to both preserving and shaping the history's past and future. No mention here when he eats and sleeps, but we developed a great relationship with Taylor and the Sharon Historical Society, and we're happy to have him here to speak again. I give you Taylor Glass.
Well, thank you so much. Bill definitely commands the room because as soon as he stood up here, the room got really silent. Isn't that amazing? Well, thank you all for having me. As Bill said, my name is Taylor Galaska. I didn't talk about the book in my bio, but this book came out in August of this year, and then the most recent one, Lost Department Stores of Sharon, came out last week. These both have been a project of 2 years in the making, so it seems like it was only a few months because they came out rather quickly, but 2 years of research has gone into both books, so a lot of detail. And the reason I wrote them is that the Sharon area didn't have a lot of books about the history. I said, what can we do about that? Someone asked me if there was a book about World War II in Sharon and the Shenango Valley and how that affected the people at home, the industries, and then that sort of thing. And I said, I don't think there's a book about that. So I should probably write one. Well, that one's not out yet. I haven't researched that one. I started going backwards in time, and I landed on World War I, where a lot of the rise in the Shenango Valley came population-wise. Rosie the Riveter actually started in World War I, not World War II. So there was a lot of history there. So that book is slated to come out next year. It was shelved because then we did the Civil War. So we are doing a series. So the Civil War in the Shenango Valley. The reason I did the Shenango Valley rather than just Sharon is because at that time it was more of a valley. There were different towns, and they all had prominence at that point. Now we think of the Shenango Valley as like Sharon and Hermitage, the big cities. But at that time, Sharon wasn't the biggest. Sharon was founded in the 1790s as a small little town. William Budd came up the Shenango River from Washington County, which is south of Pittsburgh, and settled the land, built a log cabin, and he was about 21 years of age. He then went back home, grabbed his father and mother and his new wife, and they settled the land and built a log cabin. So they are credited as the first family in Sharon, but there was another family, the Bentleys, that were also in the town at the time. Somehow they didn't know of each other, even though it was just wilderness, but they were very close together. So we often credit the Budd family as the first family, but the Bentleys were also kind of there. So we don't know who really was the first. And the name Sharon, where does that come from? We really don't know. Even the Historical Society. We've done a lot of research, and it seems that, particularly in Pennsylvania, after the American Revolutionary War, soldiers were given land grants, where for their service were given land in the new states to kind of settle and repay them. So we believe that potentially someone's last name was something similar to Sharon, and the handwriting obviously would have been maybe a little hard to read, so they settled on Sharon. The most popular story, however, is that there was a Bible reading settler who likened the area to the plains of Sharon in Israel. So we don't know which one is true. As time goes on, maybe we'll actually get the real story, but over 200 years, we still don't really know where the name came from. At the time in the Civil War era, there were lots of little towns, like I said, in the Shenango Valley. So you had Sharon, then you had Sharpsville. And Sharpsville became very prominent in the Civil War era because of the rise of the Erie Extension Canal. The Erie Extension Canal would come from... would come from, down in Pittsburgh up through the Shenango Valley to Erie. And that became very popular as a means of transportation prior to the advanced railroads. So the Erie Extension Canal was a major force in developing the area because the area was laden with coal. Similar to Youngstown, Briar Hill coal, if you go into the Brookfield area, it was called Sharon Block coal, which would extend over into the Sharon area. And that was found in Sharon in about the 1830s. And from then on, the Shenango Valley blossomed with industry based on coal. This coal was bituminous, not anthracite, so it was softer, and it was perfect for iron making. So iron became the new industry in the Shenango Valley because the coal was right there. You didn't have to ship it, so a lot of people started building iron mills. The earliest mill came in the 1840s, which was called the Henry Clay Furnace. So these pictures, one is of a Erie Extension Canal boat at the Sharon Furnace that was found at the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh. The picture is of real Sharon Block coal, and then that is a etching of an 1840s view of the Shenango River. It's actually Water Street, so if you're familiar with Sharon, water kind of runs in front of that plaza where the fires used to be, and then it goes off towards Hermitage. This would have been the north side, riding along the river with little log cabins and shanty kind of houses. Chapter 2 in the book talks about the rise in iron. At that time, there were a lot of people were starting to do all the same things in the same area. The reason I called it the three links of the iron chain is because at that time, or at the time of the Sharpsville centennial, in 1924, in the Sharon Telegraph, a reporter for the gold anniversary, my apologies, so the 50th anniversary of Sharpsville, in her opening line said, "Sharpsville, one of the important lines in the chain of iron towns of the Shenango Valley." And she was correct in saying so, because Sharpsville, Sharon, and Wheatland, now we think of Wheatland as what's there, all created a chain of towns that made iron. All four of the towns, including West Middlesex, all made iron. The Iron Age began in 1845 and ended with the rise of steel. But in Sharon, the major manufacturers at that time, the biggest was in 1850, which was the Westerman Iron Company. The year 1850 marked a very big point in iron-making interest in Sharon, and from that date on, iron became king. Pig iron was made there previously at the Sharon Iron Works, which eventually became Westerman, and it had been a pioneering mill in the Sharon district, which was built by Joel Baker Curtis, who was one of the first men to find coal in the Sharon area. And then, of course, when you have the coal, you might as well open a mill because you have the supply in hand. With George Boyce. In 1862, William Coleman and James Westerman of Pittsburgh and Keller and Caleb Wick of Youngstown formed a partnership and purchased the old Sharon Mill from Joel Baker Curtis, and they operated under a special act of the state legislature. I'm not sure why they would need an act at that time to operate a mill, but they did, and it became one of the biggest parts of Sharon industry was the Sharon Iron Works. So that big elongated picture of that mill is Westerman Iron Company, which was the Sharon Iron Company. That interior view at the top is actually a stereo view, so you know that it's kind of like a Viewmaster, but the really old-fashioned kind, where it had two images that were slightly different, and they were supposed to, with the glass of the reader, was supposed to merge the images. It was supposed to be 3D. I don't know if that was really what it was doing, but that's what they thought it was doing. So that's a picture of the inside of the Westerman Iron Works at that time. The little building there with the big, like almost a unicycle, or whatever that's called, with a big wheel in the front, a little wheel in the back, that was the office of the Stewart Iron Company. And and that was one of the other major mills in town. There were a bunch, of course. Sharpsville had their own with the Pierce family, which would have been the Sharpsville furnace. And at that time, everyone started doing mills. You know, they all were able to get enough capital to open different factories throughout the area. The Westerman Iron Company, with the folks from Youngstown and Pittsburgh, reopened the factory, and a year later, the company built a railway between their works, which was in Sharon, kind of near where Penn State Shenango is downtown, and to their fields of coal. And one of the fields was actually in Brookfield, so they had a railway that went to Brookfield. It was 3 miles long. And it had Sharon block coal, often called Briar Hill coal if you're on the Ohio side. Pennsylvanians like to call it Sharon because that's, you know, our area. Ohio likes to call it Briar Hill. But it was nearly 2,000 acres with about 500 tons of output daily for that coal. And it had over 400 men at its height mining the coal. In 1863, Coleman and Wigg sold their interest to the company to Christian H. Buell, Chauncey Andrews, and W.J. Hitchcock, and they had all invested in the company at that point. When Andrews invested in the Sharon Iron Company, it was pretty natural for him to get into that. If you know anything about Chauncey Andrews, he first discovered coal in 1853. By 1858, he formed the firm of Andrews and Hitchcock, which operated coal mines and erected iron foundries in the Youngstown area. By the outbreak of the Civil War, Andrews became known as the Great Coal King of the Mahoning Valley. By 1868, Andrews and Hitchcock was the largest producer of coal in the entire state of Ohio. When he died, glowing accolades noted him as a shrewd businessman, developer of the valley's industrial infrastructure, and philanthropist. With all the new influx of money from Andrews and Hitchcock, the Westerman Iron Company built a new furnace right after the Civil War was ending, and that operated until 1874. Westerman then sold his interest to his partners, and in 1882, Christian Buell became the sole owner of the plant and reflagged it as Sharon Iron Company once again. It was later reflagged as Buell Sons and Company, and the works consisted of a rolling mill, blast furnaces over 5 acres, all under the whole plant's land was over 40 acres in size. They had a nail mill, sheet mill, hoop and guide mill, a muck train, 12 heating furnaces, 35 puddling furnaces, 6 trains for rolls, a squeezer of 500 pounds capacity, and 6 steam engines. The company produced bar, band, hoop, and sheet iron, nails, boat and railroad spikes, and small T-rails. So you can kind of see that little blotter there of the Westerman Iron Company. At the time of the Buells taking over, they had about 700 men working there, with a monthly payroll of over $35,000. That's in 1882. When adjusting for inflation, this amount would be about $1.1 million per month. However, when adjusting for the hourly pay of the workers, it was a measly 10 to 12 cents per hour, or about $43.75 per month. One business directory from 1882, at the time of the Buells taking over the foundry, said, in capital invested, value of plant, volume and value of output, the army of men given remunerative employment, and the wages dispersed, this is the most important industrial establishment, and one which has an important influence upon the prosperity of this section, as well as upon the iron trade of the state at large. The reason that the Buells are so important is because when Christian H. Buell invested in this mill, he actually came from Detroit, Michigan, where he was the city's first Republican mayor in 1860 and 1861. So right at the beginning of the Civil War, which was a big deal. Abraham Lincoln was also a Republican. He had a massive iron, brass, and railroad investment side of him, besides the politician side, in the greater Detroit area. When he invested in the Sharon Iron Company, little did anyone realize that they were making the backbone of the Shenango Valley, because at that point, Frank Buell, his son, came to Sharon after graduating from Yale in 1867. The younger Buell worked at the Sharon Iron Works for 5 years before becoming the plant manager and then superintendent. He returned to Detroit, and by 1887 he came back to marry his girlfriend, basically, after they had courted for a while. And at that point, he took over management and ownership. From there, he organized the Sharon Steel Castings Company in 1886 and 1887, which was the first steel plant in the Sharon area. It actually predated the Youngstown steel plants. Its equipment consisted of an open hearth furnace, and the first steel was made there on August 26, 1887. The plant eventually became part of American Steel Castings, which was a constituent of American Steel Foundries. From there, he created Buell Steel in 1896, which he was president of, which was merged with National Steel Company. And from there, he founded Sharon Steel Company, Sharon Steel Castings, Sharon Steel, which became the backbone of the Farrell area. At that point, it was then sold off to J.P. Morgan and U.S. Steel. But at that point, so the Civil War really was, that era really got the Buells here, and then that became, I mean, if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't have had Sharon Steel, which was one of our largest employers in the Sharon area. Chapter 3 talks about the town. So you have all this money coming in from the coal, the iron, and eventually steel. So the towns start to grow a little bit more. More people are coming, and they start putting on heirs. That's what I read in a lot of the history back then. They're putting on heirs. So I put putting on the Ritz because putting on heirs isn't quite as popular of a saying. But in the Civil War era, the Shenango Valley expanded in terms of commercial capacity and industrial might. And the population and land added to the growth and progress. As acreage was at a premium, buildings were needed to accommodate more businesses, so they grew upward. Sharon's first three-story building was built on the north side of East State Street between Vine and the railroad, and it still stands a century and a half later. Wood frame gave way to brick and stone, just as log cabins had given way to wood frame a few decades earlier. Hotels became necessary for those traveling by canal boat and later by train. The culture classes yearned for entertainment and art, which were satisfied by opera houses and lecture halls. Men's and ladies' groups allowed the sharing of ideas, reading books, and playing card games. Hunting and fishing were pastimes too, of course, with the river running through the town. Fraternal organizations such as the Free and Accepted Masons and the Independent Order of the Oddfellows allowed camaraderie and social life for those interested. The Shenango Valley was morally corrupt, however, thanks to its oversaturation of bars and taverns. Those who worked in the mines and mills of the town spent what little money they made on liquor. But not everyone was a drunkard. Sharon alone had 13 churches by 1870, when its population was 4,221. The valley's religious institutions grew in number with larger and more impressive church buildings. Newly minted captains of industry began to flaunt their wealth, erecting showy homes and mansions on the town's most prestigious streets. Main Street had its fair share of well-built and architecturally unique homes. State Street, which is now the main street, both east and west, and Irvine Avenue were home to the industrial community leaders who truly wanted to show off. Massive mansions of styles then in vogue lined the streets. Some chose locations in, quote-unquote, in the country for their residences. Hickory Township, which is now Hermitage, where large coal deposits were located, claimed early coal barons who built their awe-inspiring farmhouses. In Sharpsville, one of the town's showplaces owed their existence to the Pierce family. If you've ever seen pictures of the Pierce Mansion, it probably was the largest mansion in this entire region. Unfortunately, Mr. Pierce knocked his head at his farmhouse and died the next day, and the big mansion that he was building, he never got to live in. And now it was raised in the 1950s or 60s, and it's now pictures that you see here are of various buildings downtown that are kind of, awe-inspiring. The one with that hip roof with the little car is a postcard of the Shenango House, which was a hotel. Right to where that car is, the Erie Extension Canal ran right next to that hotel. So it was the perfect place if you wanted to stay when you were on the canal, because this was built in 1868 January, is when it was finished. It had 86 rooms, each supplied with running water piped from a house up the hill. Even the pipes, even there were pipes for gas, if and when. A large porched side on the front was something that was, quite attractive. It apparently cost $150,000, which was a vast sum in those days. Right like a block away, kind of where the roundabout is in Sharon by Quaker Steak and Lube, there was a huge pond that was called the Canal Basin. They could park over 200 canal boats there at night. The tall building on the top right was actually McDowell National Bank for a long time, so if you know McDowell Bank, that was McDowell Bank's location. But this is the 1880 Independent Order of the Oddfellows building, which was apparently paid for, the land at least, was paid in gold. Just trying to see if I can find how much gold they had to pay for it. $275 in gold. And then the bottom picture on the left is the Carver House Hotel. That was a major hotel. They had showrooms on the front for businesses, and then they also had an opera house in there. At that time, when it opened in 1868, there was an 800-seat auditorium, which was reported as Sharon's first opera house. Those that played there included Laura Keene, who was starring in Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Chapter 4 talks about setting the stage for war. How did we get here? What was happening in the area, in the national scene? So in the years leading up to the Civil War, newspapers were king. Fact-checking was nearly non-existent, and sensationalism in order to sell newspapers was prevalent before journalistic standards became common. Local newspapers had the power to influence the thoughts and opinions of the communities they served. Papers were also proudly affiliated with political parties. No need to be unbiased. 2 elections were key to what came in the years of the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln was fairly unknown at that time when he was elected as president in 1861. Soon after, states began to secede from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. By this time, in the time of the re-election in 1864, some critics were still uncertain if he was fit for the job. His successful re-election could certainly be attributed to Pennsylvania's war governor, Andrew G. Curtin, who allowed troops to return home to vote for Abraham Lincoln, just as Lincoln had done for Curtin in 1863. Mercer County was primarily Republican by the majority, and Sharon turned out for Lincoln in both elections, despite some of the older prominent families being Democratic or Whig affiliated. When Abraham Lincoln was elected, he traveled by train from his home in Springfield, Illinois, to Washington, D.C. He made several stops to quote-unquote campaign, despite already being president-elect. He gave speeches and shook hands in Cleveland and Pittsburgh, where likely most of the more prominent Shenango Valley citizens would have went to go visit. So the pictures you see here, the man is Andrew Curtin, Pennsylvania's war governor, who kind of back-scratched Lincoln, and he back-scratched back, so there was a lot of friendship there. Andrew Curtin was also called the soldier's friend because he allowed them to come home to vote and took a lot of care of the soldiers from Pennsylvania. The picture that says the grand result, that's an ad from the Pittsburgh newspapers at that time. The Daily Pittsburgh Gazette in 1860, celebrating the election of Abraham Lincoln. And then the picture with the woman who's thought to be, or said to be, Union, and these men that look like snakes, is the Copperhead Party, which appeared in Harper's Weekly in 1863. Copperheads were a sect of the Democratic Party, which was active in Mercer County. It was active in a lot of areas, but in Mercer County too. Copperheads held extremely pro-Confederate views. Nearly all Copperheads were Democratic, but that's not to say that most Northern Democrats were Copperheads. Copperhead strength was mainly in the Midwest and Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and then Pennsylvania as well, where many families had Southern roots or were agrarian in like profession. And then a lot of people that were in the industries were thought to be Republican. Copperheads were also called Peace Democrats, or any citizen in the North who opposed the war policy and advocated restoration of the Union through negotiated settlement with the South. Chapter 5 then ramps up into coming into the war and what was happening, and men started going to the front and didn't know what was to happen. So between the fall of 1861 and the spring of 1862, after 3-month volunteer regiments returned from a short stint of service, tens of thousands of Pennsylvanians volunteered to fight for the Union Army. Coming from all walks of life, the overwhelming majority were untrained in warfare techniques. They were not prepared for the rough routine of army life and the horrifying reality of war. All believed, however, that the fight to preserve the Union was their just calling. Regiments were raised through volunteers, and when quotas couldn't be fulfilled, drafts were instated. Battles were probably the most memorable part of a soldier's service, but armed engagements were only a little part of being a soldier. The majority of their time was spent in camps where the men were drilled. They battled disease and boredom as well. Marching from battlefield to battlefield accounted for hours a day of a soldier's time in the military during the Civil War. The gruesome aspects of war were etched on the faces and memories of those who served. Brother against brother, serving with friends and family members gave a sense of community, but when they were wounded or killed, it added to the mental scars of the war inflicted on those who served. While the glory should be given to those who went to war on the battlefield to crush off rebellion, those who were left behind were just as worthy, but, quote, have been overlooked the loyal ladies who provided the delicacies and mementos that encouraged soldiers in the field. Sanitary commissions and Christian commissions and ladies' aid societies of various kinds were invaluable auxiliaries. All such as aided in these directions, as well as by sending letters of cheer and encouragement to loved ones in the field, are deserving of the most grateful recognition by the nation. Could these names be made a part of the war record? As they should, a halo of imperishable glory would encircle the wreath. Some women were brave enough to go to the battlefields or military hospitals to help as nurses. However, there were also people who went to the battlefields to watch the war, thinking it was just kind of going to be, I don't know, like a little fight, so it was going to be exciting, and then it was more bloody than they had thought. So a lot of people did serve in local militias. Pennsylvania had a local militia that was really used during the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. At this point, then they started calling for volunteers. In 1861, President Lincoln actually used a law that was first enacted in 1795 to end the Whiskey Rebellion in western Pennsylvania to call for volunteers. This law authorized the call of a state militia to federal service. The following day, the Pennsylvania governor appointed Robert Patterson, a 69-year-old veteran, to command the Pennsylvania Volunteers. On July 2nd, Patterson led his troops to Virginia, where he met Confederate forces under Thomas Jackson and J.E.B. Stuart. Pennsylvania's geographical location made it a key state for the Union, and we do see that even now during elections. This is also true of Ohio. Bordered by pro-Southern states of Virginia and Maryland, Pennsylvania needed to defend the Union in its southern border. Approximately 500 men left Harrisburg for Washington, D.C. on April 18th, organized as the National Light Infantry and the Washington Artillery, the Ringgold Light Artillery, and the Logan Guards and the Allen Rifles. After their first 3-month volunteer regiment, they returned home, and then thousands were called. The monotony of camp life, the endless dust, and the long marches were something that was quite brutal for soldiers at that time. They also had a lot of horror on the battlefield. Like I said, brother against brother isn't necessarily a thing for Pennsylvanians. Most weren't fighting against an actual family member, but they were fighting next to them. Any other war, you usually weren't with your brother in the same regiment or the same field of service or the same unit, but the Civil War was more localized, where whole families were often together, fighting together, which made it a lot harder when they came back, because if you saw someone basically murder your father, isn't that going to really scar you? So that's really what plagued these soldiers. So all of these men that are pictured here all served. The gentleman with the beard on the far left at the top under the word "the" was Reverend William T. McAdam. And he actually served as a chaplain. In 1861, once the states were starting to succeed, on January 22nd, Reverend McAdam, who was a pastor at the Second United Presbyterian Church of Mercer, who later came to Sharon for the First Presbyterian Church, delivered a lecture at Mercer County Courthouse entitled "Our National Troubles." He questioned slavery as innocent cause of a war that was impending. The lecture was given by him because, quote, "At a time like this, when the citizens of several states in this magnificent confederacy are in open rebellion, it is the duty of every patriot and philanthropist to stand up in defense of his country." The gentleman below him was Captain Sprague S. Hill. He served actually with the Company B of the 19th Ohio Infantry, beginning in 1861. Served at many different battles. In January of 1863, he had participated in the Mud March, which was General Burnside's second attempt at crossing the Rappahannock to capture Richmond, Virginia. Once he was finally discharged, he became the postmaster in Pitbull City, which is in Shenango County, which is one of the fastest growing towns thanks to the discovery of oil. So from 1865 to the end of from the summer of 1865 to the end of July of 1866, he was the postmaster there. And his post office was the third busiest post office in the entire state, only behind Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. In Pitbull City in 1865, it had a population of 2,000. That was in July. In September, they had 15,000 people. So 2 months, it grew 13,000 people. By the end of 1866, only 2,000 people remained. The man with the big cowboy hat and a really long beard was a colonel in the Army. The big picture with the little tie up top is actually Colonel Dwight C. Strawbridge. He was with the Keystone Zouaves, which were the Company B of that unit, was raised in Mercer County, and he was eventually promoted to colonel of that regiment, and he actually had a lot of his family members in his same unit. Eventually, when he came back from the war, founded a bank, and that would eventually become McDowell National Bank. And the picture with this kind of funky looking outfit is part of the Zouave unit. That's the 76th Pennsylvania Regiment called the Keystone Zouaves. They had this kind of fanciful uniform while others others were just in more plain garb. So after the war, people came back and they were obviously struggling with coping with, what had happened to them during the war, and how could they adapt to civilian life. When the war ended, several events marked the days and weeks after the surrender that was signed at Appomattox Courthouse. President Lincoln and his wife indulged in a theatrical show at Ford's Theater to celebrate the war's end. In those moments, the couple probably enjoyed the show in friendship with another couple and the American people. In a defining moment in our country's history, an assassin was waiting for the right time to kill the president, and he succeeded. In a route similar to that of his inauguration train in 1861, Lincoln's body was traveling from Washington, D.C. to his home in Springfield, Illinois. The funeral train passed through many towns, and citizens paused and showed respect to the fallen president along the tracks. Shenango Valley citizens, and probably Mahoney Valley citizens, likely would have made the trek to Cleveland to see the president for the first or last time. A military commission was formed to investigate the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. The 9-person committee, which included military officers, it also included a Mercer County resident, John A. Bingham, as a special judge advocate. Evidence was presented and found that 7 men and 1 woman had conspired to murder the president. 4 were sentenced to hang. So the picture with all these men is the military commission that was appointed to investigate the assassination attempt. So after he was assassinated, 9 competent military officers, that's what they said, was established by the presidential order of May 1st, 1865 to hear evidence against 7 men and 1 woman charged with conspiring to murder President Abraham Lincoln. One of these 3 was Brevet Brigadier General James A. Aiken of Pittsburgh. However, the Shenango Valley has an even closer connection to the assassination trial with Special Judge Advocate John A. Bingham, who was born and raised in Mercer, PA, the son of a carpenter. He went to study at Franklin College, which is now part of Muskingum College, beginning his career in law and politics. He was admitted to the Pennsylvania bar in 1840. The following year, he was admitted to the Ohio bar. In 1854, he was elected to Congress, where he combined moral commitment with practical legislative acumen. In one constitutional law scholar's article, he said, "More than any man except Abraham Lincoln, John Bingham was responsible for what the Civil War meant for the American future." His role as a civilian on the commission to investigate the conspiracy for the murder of the president, he argued that the assassination of Lincoln was not simply murder, but a criminal act intended to undermine the government and aid the rebellion. In summarizing the facts of the case, Bingham's arguments emphasized the conspiracy aspect of the assassination, asserting that it was part of a larger plot to overthrow the government. He went on, after his time with this commission, he went on to deliver the House impeachment articles to Senate in the trial of President Andrew Johnson, and provided the trial's closing argument, an oration that stretched into 3 days. In his most notable contribution to the country's history and future, Bingham was the primary author of key sections of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. This language became the legal underpinning of the civil rights movement and the struggle to apply, quote-unquote, equal protection and due process to all Americans. The picture of this piece of fabric is a piece of the dress of Laura Keene when she was playing at Ford's Theater when Abraham Lincoln was shot. She requested that after he was shot, she tried to keep order. She was on stage at the time. And then she fled to the presidential box where she requested to hold the president's head in her lap. Of course, the blood from his wound got all over her dress, and this is a little piece that's in the presidential library of Abraham Lincoln. She apparently was very people wanting to see this dress after this happened, because she did keep it for a while and it was still all blood covered. People would always ask, can we see it? Which is kind of weird. So she eventually was so disturbed that she gave it back to the designer, and the designer eventually gave it to her daughter. And then the picture came from the library of Abraham Lincoln. At the time when she was playing at the Carver House Hotel in Sharon, the dress was apparently on display. But I don't know how, because she gave it back to the designer and she was very sickened by people wanting to see it. But however, in 1941, Sharon Herald article, it says that Sharon's first opera house, which was built in 1868, first called the Hanson Opera House and later called the Carver House, attracted many nationally and internationally famous lecturers and actors to Sharon. One of them was Laura Keene, who was famous for her performance during Our American Cousin when Abraham Lincoln was shot. The article states, she held his head in her lap until her dress was soaked with blood. The day she was to perform in Sharon, the blood-stained dress was displayed prominently in a local store window. It seems that the dress may have been displayed, or possibly a facsimile of the dress was made to draw a crowd. After the war, I chose this because there was an article in one of the newspapers that said the spirit of 61 still lingers, and I thought that's kind of an interesting title for this chapter. The men who served the Union so proudly were forever changed when they returned from military service. Some were wounded physically, others were scarred mentally, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and heart conditions like soldier's heart. Surgeons on the battlefield were strained in their capacity to care for the wounded. Bullets buried in soldiers' bodies believed to have been removed at military hospitals later caused pain and were removed when they came home. The returning soldiers yearned for the brotherhood they had experienced in the regiments, which fueled the organization of the Grand Army of the Republic, the Union Veterans Legion, and the United Confederate Veterans. The Shenango Valley boasted several GAR posts, with the largest in Sharon. The ladies who were related to the Civil War veterans formed the Ladies of the Grand Army of the Republic. Charity was put above self in these groups. When the last members died, the mission was turned over to the younger folks who were part of the American Legion and the veterans of foreign war posts. Memorials and monuments erected in stone and bronze dotted the landscape from the battlefields that claimed so many lives to cities who wished to honor the sacrifices of their local Civil War veterans. The Mercer County Soldiers Monument in Mercer was erected in 1897, which is the one on the far right of the courthouse in the back. By 1917, West Middlesex had a monument and fountain dedicated at Haywood Cemetery, which was donated by Elizabeth Haywood, the widow of former state treasurer Benjamin Haywood, who lived in Sharon, which is that picture in the middle with those flowers. It's not a fountain any longer. To celebrate the first anniversary of the end of World War I, the Sharon GAR Post 254 unveiled their monument, which stands at the Veterans section of Oakwood Cemetery, which is the picture on the far right. In 1913, Pennsylvania commemorated the bloodiest battles during the war, Gettysburg. A special commission was created by Congress and the Pennsylvania governor to appropriate accommodations and events to celebrate. Sharon's own Alexander McDowell of McDowell Bank was appointed to the commission. Over 50,000 soldiers and people throughout the country attended the 4-day event over the Independence holiday of 1913, 50 years after the Battle of Gettysburg. On May 5th, 1868, the JR established Decoration Day, now called Memorial Day, as a time for the nation to decorate the graves of the war dead with flowers. At Arlington National Cemetery, then Congressman James Garfield spoke about the solemn occasion. He said, "We do not know one promise these men made, one pledge they gave, one word they spoke, but we do know they summed up and perfected by one supreme act the highest virtues of men and citizens. For the love of country they accepted death. and thus resolved all doubts, and made immortal their patriotism and their virtue. Go back a slide. So there's a picture of a GAR ribbon there from the Sharon branch. The men marching in this parade are Sharpsville GAR members who marched in 1906. The man with the white hat in front is actually Captain Jonas J. Pierce, who was a part of the Pierce family. He eventually became a major factor in the iron industry in Sharpsville, but he served in the war, despite not having to, because he was from a wealthy family, so he didn't have to go. He could have paid a replacement. And then the man with the glasses and the top hat, that was Sharon's last Civil War veteran to stay alive. So gradually, as the ranks of the GAR post of Sharon 254 were depleted, and they were turned over the work to younger organizations. Originally, the charter members for the GAR in Sharon, which was 1882 is when it was founded, had 43 members. By 1888, they only had 2 members that had died, so 6 years later, but the post eventually grew to over 200 members. In 1930, the Sharon Post only had 13 members left. 2 years later, in an article titled "The Spirit of '61 Still Lingers," the remaining 5 GAR members of the Sharon Post declared they would refuse to give up their charter and would continue to hold meetings until, quote, the wearer of the blue, last wearer of the blue had died. 4 years later, in 1936, the last member, the gentleman with the very round glasses, died. That was Edward V. Randolph, who died at the age of 94. He was often called Daddy Randolph and was from Sharon originally, but he came from Zelienople in 1887 and was employed as the yardmaster at Beals Sharon Steel Castings Company. The Beals were also from Zelienople before they moved to Detroit. He was also a storekeeper until it was acquired by U.S. Steel in 1902. Then he entered the newspaper business, which he was still in at the age of 80. Randolph enlisted in the 134th Pennsylvania Infantry and later served with Company G of the 4th Pennsylvania Cavalry, which saw action at the Battle of Antietam and Fredericksburg, where he was wounded. National encampments held GAR like reunions throughout the years from 1866 until 1949, when the last member nationally had passed. Mercer County's last Civil War veteran died at the age of 98 in 1943. He was from Sandy Lake, and he lived there for 73 years. In his article on his 97th birthday, he said, I'm, quote, I am proud that I served my country in the Civil War under General Burnside and later under General Sherman. I was with Sherman from Atlanta to the sea, 4 brothers of us in the war, and now I have a grandson carrying on the medical department of the 15th Infantry. So this was during World War II. After the war, he became a farmer, blast furnace worker, and later a coal mine operator. And then the book ends with the end of the Civil War and the rise of Sharon as the county metropolis, as it was called in many histories. Not much of a metropolis now, or even then probably, but they liked to sell it. So the Shenango Valley had grown exponentially during the Civil War. By the end of the war and the beginning of the following decade, Sharon had become a bustling town. In 1850, so before the war, Sharon's population was 541. Greenville, which, if you're familiar, is north of Sharon, was the largest town in Mercer County with 1,036 people. 10 years later, in 1860, Sharon had 900 people. Mercer had surpassed Greenville and had 1,249. A decade later, by 1870, Sharon had gained the lead with 4,236 221, and had been and has been the largest settlement of the county ever since. From 1860 to 1870 showed the greatest increase in Sharon's entire history in population, 369%, from 900 people to 4,221. The nearest approach when the town gained over 6,000 in 10 years was from 1900 to 1910, but that was only an increase of 71%. While Sharon grew in number of residents, it also grew in its governmental oversight. In 1866, Sharon passed its first speeding law, prohibiting riding or driving at a gallop. An ordinance was also made forbidding swimming, bathing, or washing when naked in the Shenango River or on the Erie Extension Canal between sunrise until 8 p.m. So you can do it after that. Horses and pigs were no longer allowed to run wild. Only cows could have the freedom of the streets, which were soon curbed too. The town leaders built a jail for locally owned cattle that were frequent violators of trespassing ordinances. In 1868, an ordinance was passed to prohibit speeding on bridges, since the 1866 ordinance didn't slow traffic on bridges. Signs were erected at or near the bridges in big, plain letters of the fines between $5 and $30. The ordinance prohibited, quote, anyone from driving, leading, or causing anyone to drive or lead any horse or beast of burden faster than a walk on the canal bridge or the river bridge. Parking downtown became a problem as well. In September 14, 1868, an ordinance was passed prohibiting or providing a fine for anyone who obstructed a highway, lane, or alley with a wagon, buggy, sleigh, or any other vehicle. If the owner didn't claim the vehicle within 10 days, it was advertised for sale by the street commissioner. On March 2nd, 1869, the town council provided that anyone who hitched a horse, mare, gelding, mule, or any other animal to a shade tree in front of any property should pay a fine. If trees or shrubs were mutilated or injured within the borough, fines were to be applicable as well. And no loafing in the streets was permitted. On June 1st, 1868, quote, any person or persons who shall loaf, stand, sit, or in any manner obstruct sidewalks in the streets or on the river or canal bridges in the borough shall forfeit and pay for the use of said borough a fine of not less than $5 and costs or undergo imprisonment in the borough lockup. The Sharon Herald called attention to the fact that nails on the wooden sidewalks on North Main Street tore ladies' dresses as they walked into church. Sharon was muddy in those early years until the late 19th century. Many of the buildings in the town were kind of built on stilts. One young lady made a misstep on East State Street and went plunging headlong down into the mud. But, quote, God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. She was saved by her hoop skirt catching on the nail in the wooden sidewalk. Industrially, the Shenango Valley and Sharon grew. The days of iron gave way to the iron horse, which was the railroads that came through town, and then eventually cars became even more popular. Local public utilities became commonplace with the Sharon Gas, Light, and Water Company, which was chartered in 1863. Natural gas was first offered at a rate of $3 per 1,000 cubic feet, which was nearly impossible for those of modest means. First gas plant soared 100 feet and was quite a sight. Local mills didn't have any meters, so they paid based on how much iron they were producing. The American Encyclopedia, published in 1870 when Sharon had a population of over 4,000, described the prospering town. A town in Mercer County, PA, situated on the Shenango River. It has 2 iron bridges, 2 rolling mills, nail factories, 2 foundries, 6 iron furnaces, 2 planing mills, several industries, 2 national banks, 1 savings bank, 1 private bank, 3 hotels, 3 large school buildings, 3 weekly newspapers, and 9 churches. As one historian stated, that had it not been for the Civil War, the United States would not have been united enough to succeed in winning the wars that were to come. Little did they know that in 1898, the United States would be at war with Spain, solidifying America as a world power. And they certainly didn't foresee the war to end all wars that would engulf Europe and would ultimately require the United States to intervene. Those at home had their first chance at assisting those in the service during the Civil War. Both those who served and those at home were now more prepared than ever for a new type of conflict, a world